All right, welcome again to Matchcast. Today we have a very special guest joining us for episode number 3, our good friend Dan Putt. Dan has been a co-founder. He functions as a board member for MatchNode. He is full-time at Reboot, which he's going to talk a little bit more about. He's been our business partner in the past, and most importantly, he's been a friend and mentor to both Chris and I throughout the years. So welcome to Matchcast, Dan.
Thanks, Brian and Chris. It's good to be here. I'm impressed already.
Well, awesome, man. Today we thought it'd be interesting to trace a little bit of your life cycle and your journey in the digital marketing world and see how it's evolved over time, take a look at some of the lessons you've learned along the way, and see some things that are very applicable even to today's digital marketing world. Even though a lot of the things and tactics you've used over the years have changed, the lessons you've learned and that journey is still very, very, very relevant today.
Great. That sounds good to me.
Cool, man. So how did you get started in digital marketing? You were on the very early days of AdWords and affiliate marketing. What introduced you to this world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was trying to think about this, what sort of the genesis. I mean, I'm heading to Italy in a few weeks for we do these boot camps at Reboot, and so I'm heading for our Tuscan boot camp. And Italy is actually where I got my first sort of entrepreneurial start, just being kind of the nerd that I was and noticing that every little electronics store had overpriced computers. And so after my first trip to Italy where I studied abroad, when I came home, I cold called Toshiba and HP and basically negotiated a purchasing agreement with them where I could buy their off-lease computers and sell them first to Italians on eBay. And it was while I was sort of a couple years into that business, which taught me a lot about entrepreneurship, that I read an article in Business 2.0 about somebody, I forget the guy's name, it's like Dan something, who I ended up connecting with later on. But he had just written a story about running AdWords ads for top Amazon books that were selling as an affiliate. This was back in the days where it was easy to just direct link an AdWords ad to whatever book or product on Amazon, and how as long as his cost per click was lower than his commission per click, he could do it all day long. And I was extremely interested in that and fascinated by it. Always been a guy who likes to figure out how things work and kind of deconstruct it. So this was like early November 2005, and I remember diving in and doing all kinds of research and finding the top toys for the upcoming Christmas, setting up my Amazon affiliate account, setting up a Linkshare account to get Walmart affiliate, and running some campaigns, not really knowing what I was doing, racking up some credit card debt along the way, and having faith that the Linkshare and Amazon were going to pay me the commissions that they said that I was generating. And that was kind of my first foray into the digital marketing world. Very different time.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, one of the things that's really fun about this is the three of us have known each other for a long time, and I feel like we've talked about this subject so many times, but I never knew that Italian piece of your story. So that makes this really fun. How did you get traffic from Italy at that point?
I was just selling on eBay Italy, and I was using Google Translate or Babelfish or whatever was popular at the time to basically write my eBay listings and translate them to Italian.
Wow.
So Dan, I think one of the big takeaways is you've got a reputation as an early adapter and jumping onto new platforms even when you're not totally sure how they work. Can you talk about that process and the mental aspect to it of being willing to try a new platform even if you weren't totally sure exactly what the outcomes were going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it a little bit. I'm very curious on how things work, and I can't help myself from trying to figure out how they piece together. And so when I'm in that mode, I'm less concerned about outcomes and more interested in just learning. And so in the AdWords example, I mean, this was like brand new AdWords. This is late 2005. I don't remember exactly when Google launched AdWords, but it couldn't have been more than a few years before that. Endlessly Googled and read about it, but most importantly, just was willing to throw on a credit card and start running some ads. And I remember it was a little scary at times, but just driven by the fascination. How does this work? How does this come together? What is this piece? How are other people doing it has always been a central theme, I guess, in my digital marketing approach is what are other people doing that's working and kind of deconstructing what they've done, hopefully leveraging their own failures. But I think that's always been key for me.
Yeah, so this is definitely resonating a lot. You're talking about deconstructing a couple times and just the genuine curiosity of wanting to figure something out. We've talked about it, and the three of us have talked about it in terms of it being like a puzzle, which is a really fun consideration. And when you're in that mode, it seems like, do you find yourself in your career so far, have you gotten better results when you're in that mode of just trying to satisfy your curiosity because you want to do something and being disconnected from results, or has that sometimes led you down the wrong path, or at least as far as the results go? How have the results tracked these kind of two different approaches that you seem to allude to?
I found that generally, the more it comes from a place of curiosity and just trying to learn something, understand something, the better the results have been. When they start to get really high stakes, which we could talk about some of the projects that you and I did way back when, Chris, first starting, where it had to work, like we have to figure this out for X, Y, and Z reasons. It was much harder, I think, because you weren't as open, or I wasn't as open to learning the lessons as they came. It was just another failure in the process, and that I needed to work. When I approach it with some curiosity and playfulness, it tends to come much more easy. And I know this logically, but it's much harder to do in practice.
So Dan, that speaks a little bit to the creativity balanced with the numbers and data of digital marketing and what comes first. And it sounds like you're advocating much more of the creative approach coming first.
Yeah, I think partially, for me at least, it's kind of the initial intent or intention that drives the project, or gets me into the process. If it's just to learn and to understand things better and to see what I can figure out, then the outcome, the results tend to be better for me. And I think part of that is because I'm more open to the testing. I'm more open to what the data says. If it comes back and says that this approach is not working, then I'm willing to try a new one, versus when I need to make this project work, when the data comes back and says this approach is not working, it's much more scary and can be a much bigger setback. So I think it comes from just, hey, I want to try something, and that's one of my best projects, I think, in the digital marketing realm and the affiliate marketing world have been, hey, let's just try something. I mean, we met Brian, or we started working together from that same approach when, generating the leads with NCSA.
Right. I think that's a perfect segue. Let's talk about some of those early projects that you worked on with either me or with Chris. And most importantly, not so much the projects or even the tactics, but the lessons you learned in some of those instances.
Well, we learned a lot with when the three of us came together to generate leads for NCSA.
Our first official project, all working the three of us together, was when I worked at a company called NCSA Athletic Recruiting, and we helped match high school athletes with college coaches. And Dan and Chris came on board to help us drive digital leads in some creative ways that we weren't nimble enough to approach. You want to talk about that process a little bit, Dan, and I guess some of your takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, we had talked quite a bit about some of your ongoing challenges generating leads for them. And I just knew that there were ways that other people had been generating leads, or there were ways that we could do it more efficiently. And so Chris and I came to you and we talked about how we could basically figure out other ways to be more efficient. And one of the things I knew was that there were a number of areas that were generating leads that could generate targeted leads that were not being utilized by NCSA. And again, an arbitrage opportunity, which is a common theme for me. I knew that we could essentially generate those for far less than what NCSA was willing to pay for them. It was a lot harder than I think both Chris and I thought, but we learned a ton about the affiliate world. We learned a ton about pay per lead, cost per lead. And I think one of our best tactics ultimately, which was a matter of, hey, let's experiment, was calling and qualifying leads that we were buying from other sources, which was adding a step to a process that other people weren't willing to do, but we figured out how to do it cheaply enough and efficiently enough that we could generate qualified leads at a profitable rate.
Right. So it's kind of a counterintuitive thought to generating leads on the internet, calling them.
Yes.
But it really, I think, speaks to your overall approach when approaching a problem. And most importantly, finding a solution is looking at things a little bit differently to ultimately have success.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing that happened in that situation, where the three of us are kind of witness to or participants in, is that the three of us were good friends. Our relationships kind of deepened through digital marketing. Dan, knowing you and knowing Brian, there's this part to good digital marketers where there's kind of a yin and the yang within the approaches we use. And within the ability to use some of these very dry tactics, some not dry necessarily, but very data driven, very much about numbers and dollars and cents, and then to use them. If you're only good at that, if that's your only kind of way into it, it's going to be a struggle, because the other part of it is very creative. It's very much about people. It's seeing that the behind the click is a person, and then there's this kind of other layer where the three of us had our relationships kind of deepened through this work. And Dan, know from talking to you that in some ways you use some of these skills as kind of like a way to meet new people, or a way to start a conversation with somebody that you wanted to meet. Can you think of any examples of that maybe would tease that out a little bit?
Yeah, there's been a number of those throughout the years. Pretty much for me, it always came back or comes down to a genuine curiosity in people and their stories. And that's a particularly helpful approach with the digital marketing world, because good digital marketers out there are testing and experimenting and trying different approaches. And a shortcut in learning the same things that they're learning is getting together with them and learning their stories. So, I have a number of friends who were sort of these affiliates that you would read about, who the people who are making all kinds of money from while they're traveling all over the world. And I met a number of people who were just doing that, kind of living in the shadows, just out of curiosity, like, what are you doing? How is it working? And developing real relationships through that curiosity. It feels like everything good in my career has come from a genuine interest in what someone is doing and what they've learned. And initially, it was mostly around marketing, but it's expanded more recently. And
you're drawing a lot of very important to you lines through developing relationships with other people out of a pure curiosity and interest in them. And you talked about the psychological tactics of setting up a successful digital marketing campaign, and empathy being, an ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand what that experience might be like for them when they're sitting across from you at the table or on the other side of your digital marketing campaign. Do you find that practice has, enriched your professional life? Is that something you actually practice regularly and you're trying to always do throughout life, or do you find that to be just something that develops as you go?
That's a really great question, actually. If I were to think about, where I've had success beyond what I talked about with curiosity, I think it's when I am able to really deeply connect with what another person may be experiencing or have experienced. You're really very, very much connecting with what they're going through or what their experience is. And I think that's worked extremely well in marketing. It's worked extremely well with copywriting. Really not just like trying to imagine what somebody might be going through as they hit this landing page or, read this email, but like really trying to feel it. And it's interesting now how you're asking that question. That's the same skills and the same toolbox that I'm reaching into in my work with Reboot, whether it's actually coaching, which I do a little bit of, facilitating some of our groups, or developing products. It's if you can't really emotionally connect with what someone's experience may be, then it's hard to really develop either a language or a product that can serve them and support them. So there's no question that developing an empathetic connection with someone and being able to step into their shoes is really important.
It does. And you kind of, we're starting to go there. And I think this is a good time where we want to talk about Reboot a little bit. And it sounds like you're just about to take that step. So why don't you go for it and tell the listeners a little bit more about Reboot, kind of, if you don't mind, how you got there, and then how it kind of overlaps a little bit with some of these lessons that you're picking up as you're developing your career in digital marketing, if that's an aside to it, or if you see that as something that overlaps with the things that you do at Reboot.
Let's talk about what is Reboot for all our listeners.
So Reboot is a coaching company. We work with pretty much exclusively with tech companies and entrepreneurs. And, we coach in a number of ways, whether it's one-on-one coaching, we do boot camps, we do peer groups. And really the whole structure of the organization is to support the emotional roller coaster, the ups and downs, the personal struggles of really building great companies and doing great things. And for me personally, and Chris was there for a lot of this, I've experienced the real struggles of trying to build a company and knowing what it does to you personally and what it does to you emotionally and does to your own sort of mental awareness and sanity and health, knowing the importance of having whether a coach or a good friend or some kind of peer group, somebody that you could just talk to about what's going on, and knowing how helpful that can be in your own sanity and also ultimately your own performance. So having had that support while I was trying to build companies, I knew how important it was for me. And it was something I always wanted to do for someone else. And when the opportunity presented itself to help start Reboot and kind of pay it forward, I jumped on it. So I know how important it is. I know how hard it is to build companies, and I know how important it is to have that support. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, Brian, on what Reboot is. I'm in Reboot because I saw one of my partners and co-founders, Jerry, give a talk. Jerry Colonna, he's a former VC turned coach, and he gave a talk about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, just about I'm just starting coaching, and but he was mostly there to talk about investing, and that's what people wanted to hear him talk about. But I was immediately intrigued, like, what's a coach? How does that work? And so using some of the stuff that I had learned previously, I came home, tracked down Jerry's information, sent him a cold email, as I often did, like, hey, I'd like to hear more about your story. Ultimately, he became my coach and now my partner. So, just having that curiosity in people is really what led me to where I am now within Reboot.
I think that was a really interesting point when you said about a cold email, as you often did. Over the years, estimate how many cold emails you've sent out?
I don't do it in mass, but I do it when I'm genuinely interested in connecting with someone. Gosh, I couldn't even begin to estimate. In the thousands, I'm sure, especially when I was in New York when there were so many people who were accessible.
I think it really speaks to the importance of just taking that first step.
Yeah, absolutely. In not really having any concern about people saying no or people blowing me off, which plenty of people did.
What would you guess your conversion rate was on that as far as getting a response and having it turn into something?
I would say getting a response was actually pretty high. I mean, even for well-known authors and speakers, it's probably at least 50, 60%. Getting together or having a conversation, that was probably 30% of the time, maybe. And then I would say that I've had some really good relationships and friendships and partnerships come out of maybe 5 to 10% of those. So it's been a remarkably effective approach for me. But this seems like the theme of this conversation. But again, coming from a place of real curiosity in the person. A lot of times I go into those meetings and the people would say, hey, so how can I help you? And I wouldn't have an answer to the question because I didn't have any intention. I just wanted to meet them and hear their story.
Did you ever find some people would have a funny reaction to that? Like, I've had situations before where maybe I was trying a similar approach, and when I didn't have a great answer to that question of how can I help you, I sometimes got to look back of like, what are we doing here? Like, don't you need anything or don't you want something?
Yep, absolutely. I definitely got my share of those. And I sometimes would feel bad about it. Like, oh, shoot, I really need to get better about thinking about that. But at the end of the day, I felt like my approach works pretty well for me and has led to some really good relationships.
For sure. So it sounds like the cases that have worked best for you have been really driven just by that curiosity and a lack of concern for maybe the outcome or the finances involved, which I think a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of putting that first. Do you see commonality within yourself in that kind of very interpersonal interest that you have in others, and as well as maybe a more tactical kind of numbers focused, roll up your sleeves and dig into some digital marketing campaigns? Do you see those coming from the same place?
I think so. I mean, I think it's an interest in wanting to know what makes people tick and what makes things work. And so, with a person that's getting together and hearing their story, with a campaign, for example, that's having the data and really seeing what's working, what's not working. In some ways, to sound cheesy, the data and the metrics tell a story themselves. What's always been interesting to me is the psychology that comes hand in hand with developing a really strong and effective digital marketing campaign. And so there's obviously some similarities too in terms of meeting with people and developing relationships. It's kind of understanding where they're coming from, how are they ticking, and the same is true with what's driving good metrics in a campaign.
Dan, you've talked a lot about mentors today. You've had a number of mentors over the years. Can you just briefly talk about, a few of them and the big lessons or takeaways you got from those opportunities? I mean, I'll venture to say you were an early mentor for me when I barely knew what a landing page was. And that was really a huge step in my career.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, to me, it always felt like you were tremendously effective at making things work in at times a challenging environment, and an environment that didn't recognize the value of what you were bringing to the table. And so, like, I remember looking over, Windows Media embedded videos on a landing page that played in a buggy way, and you reaching out and saying, how do I improve this? And I was like, oh man, that's a rough place to start. But you made it work. So I appreciate you saying that.
Well, in some ways, it was an easy place to start because when you're starting from the ground floor, there's only one place to go but up.
That's true. But I think it says how long ago that was too. The fact that there was a Windows Media Player.
Yeah, I'm guessing some of our listeners won't know what that is.
I've been fortunate to meet some really wonderfully talented people and learn quite a bit. Maybe if I were to try and distill it down to one commonality I've seen throughout with all of them is a real self-awareness, a real strength, like a real understanding of what's important to them and what they want to work towards, or what they are working towards, and what they want to work on, and what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, and being comfortable with that. It's not something I've totally stepped into yet, but I've seen pretty consistently with a lot of my friends and a lot of my mentors.
Well, Dan, we really appreciate having you on Matchcast today. We appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule. Anything you want to leave our listeners, any final lessons of wisdom?
Yeah, don't be afraid to follow your curiosity and see where it takes you, and make mistakes. Also, and thanks for having me on. It's fun to chat with you guys about this, and it's always fun to talk about yourself.
Okay, well, thanks to everyone for joining us again on Matchcast. We will be back hopefully very soon with another yet exciting guest. And Dan, I'm sure we'll have you on the podcast soon in the future. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, guys.